questions are arising. I'm Noura Khan, like Lisa said. I'm VP of Communications for the A4 Alumni Affinity Group, and we are so excited to be a part of the One Bear, One Book alumni conversation. Tonight's featured book is Boss Lady, Boss Love, Own Your Power, Attract Real Love, and it's written by somebody very, very special to the A4 community, Dr. Mina Yang, class of '89. She is our co-president and the founder and CEO of True Connection Pathway. It's always really meaningful when members of our alumni community bring their expertise into these broader Brown conversations. And I'm so especially proud to celebrate Mina tonight, not only as an author and expert, but also a leader within the A4 community. Mina, I'm going to just, talk you up and hype you up a bit more because I'm so excited and just excited about this topic, excited about you. Mina is a rapid transformational therapy hypnotherapist and relationship coach. And as some of you may know, she's also a former music professor with over 20 years of experience in helping people unlock their full potential, which is a unique blend of neuroscience-based tools, hypnotherapy, and real-world coaching. And she uses this to guide smart, successful people towards the love that they really want, and really helping people realize their dreams. And at Brown, Mina was an art history concentrator, and she was the co-director of Fusion Dance Company. And by her own admission, she probably danced Janet Jackson's Control album in at least a dozen places on off campus, which I'm sure she'll be excited to tell us about if folks have questions about that. And then Boss Lady, Boss Love, honestly, I was telling, everyone before, I have so many quotes from this book that I've highlighted that I would love to ask Mina about. And I think what's really compelling about this is that it's just such an empowering roadmap for anyone that wants to build healthier relationships. And this conversation tonight gives us the space to reflect, share insights, and connect with each other. And again, before we dive in, I'd really love to invite everyone to participate. Feel free to drop the questions that you have into the chat anytime. Raise your hand, come off of mute, show your faces. We'll love to weave in your questions as we go. So Mina, let's start at the beginning. What inspired you to write this book now? At this stage in your life, this stage in your career, like what was the inspiration?
Well, so I probably all of you. I was very much an overachiever. I went to good schools and got good grades. I went into the academic world, published things. And so I was successful by a lot of measures, but my love life always was just terrible. Like I just always picked the wrong men. And then I got myself into a 10 plus year marriage that was a disaster. And so once I got a divorce, I started to do some work on this because obviously there was something I was missing. And so, like any good Brown grad, I really dove into the books, podcasts, I did all the research. I also got some relationship coaching and I got trained in hypnotherapy. And I got to a point where I basically cracked the code. I figured out I was doing everything wrong. And I was able to glean certain principles that make for a healthy relationship. And that's exactly what I did. I followed that formula and I ended up being in really the best relationship of my life, really starting in the mid 50s. So it took me a really long time, but I did finally get there. So I wanted to share what I learned with other women because I know I'm not the only one who's gone through these struggles. And that's really what resulted in my business today and in this book.
I mean, you did mention you're a high achiever, which I think is a shared common trait amongst many in the Brown community. I'd say all in the Brown community. I've never met a single person from our community that is not just absolutely delightful to talk to. And I learned so much from every single person that I've talked to. But, especially I was really interested to see, the aspect about high achievers in particular. Like, why do you think it is that high achievers especially struggle in love, even when they're capable and self-aware in so many other areas of their lives?
There are a few reasons. One is that sometimes we are high achievers because perhaps when we were kids, we didn't necessarily have the kind of unconditional love shown to us at home, or maybe there was a lot of chaos at home. And so we needed to find validation outside of our homes. And so we did really well in school. We got praise from our teachers. And so it could be sign of things perhaps not being completely healthy at home in terms of relationships. And a lot of what gets imprinted on us as children, we tend to repeat those patterns as adults. So if we didn't have parents who were always giving us unconditional love or showing us unconditional love, it's possible that we would end up with partners who repeat those patterns for us. And so a lot of us absorbed the message that we had to perform for love, that we had to earn love. So that's one camp of people. And then I think a lot of us also learned that if we really work hard at something, if we really put a lot of effort into something, then we will see success. But with romantic relationships, that doesn't always work out. Sometimes we over effort. Sometimes we overfunction. And especially women, high achieving women tend to have this, kind of ability to just kind of white knuckle things through things and just do our best and never give up, which are really admirable qualities in our careers, in school. But in a relationship, it can lead to self-abandonment. So that's kind of the danger that I see among a lot of high achieving women.
I guess once someone recognizes these, themselves and like these kinds of patterns, what are like you in your book, you go through so many like different, really helpful practical exercises that people kind of go through to sort of get their thoughts on paper, really introspect, and then use that to kind of go to that next step of like, well, how do I one identify this and change it going forward? So I guess if you could tell us a little bit about some of those practical tools that you have, what are some of the first practical steps that they can take to make this shift?
Yeah, so a lot of it is recognizing the patterns we've been playing out in our love lives. So if you're always someone who's chasing after emotionally unavailable men, think about that. Like, what is it about those men that draw you to them? Or if you're someone who rejects nice men as being boring, again, like, why? Why is it that you can't give someone a chance when they're nice and available and wanting to spend time with you? Or if you're someone who gets, anxious if somebody gets too close, why is it scary for you to be vulnerable? So it helps a lot to be really kind of honest with yourself and figure out what those patterns are and think about where they might come from. Because again, a lot of times these are, echoes of our childhood. And so was there a parent who was perhaps not as available? Was there a school situation? I mean, some of us come from lovely families and, maybe there's nothing obviously, not wrong, but problematic with your relationship with your parents, but maybe you had a school situation. I mean, there are a lot of times when trauma with a small t can have made an impact on your young psyche that still play out in your adult life. So it's really trying to go back to the past and figure out where this comes from and to recognize that back then, maybe these behaviors helped you protect yourself. So, you going outside of your family to get validation, maybe that was the way that you survived and even thrived. But do you need to still do that today? I just kind of figure out like, what do I need today as an adult that maybe in the past it did help protect me, whatever behavior you're engaging in, like avoiding commitment. But does that help you today in terms of the goals that you have for yourself today?
I mean, one of the really basic, like highlighted things that I have in your book that really resonated with me on this point was, it's not necessarily like in this doing this introspection process. The goal isn't to dwell on mistakes or regrets, but to gain a greater sense, a level of self awareness that empowers you to make different choices in the future, right? It's very much introspecting and having this sort of actionable approach to what you change to quote another part in your book, you can manifest a different future for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So it does have to translate into action. So it's great to, really go within and figure out what's going on inside of you. But at a certain point, that should empower you to move and to act. A lot of people, it seems, have kind of given up on love. They've done the dating app thing and they're sick of it. And they just kind of say, hey, I don't need to do this anymore. And especially for women today, because we do make money. We don't really need men in the same way we might have a few generations ago. But the fact is, life is better with a good partner, right? And so if that's what you want, then you don't just look within, you have to also take actions and learn from what you're doing out there in the world.
And I think like one of the things that you had discussed as sort of the thing that might stop you from taking action is sometimes like that internal dialogue one has with yourself and the negative thoughts and how they show up and like how you behave and how you interact with people and the way positive thoughts show up as well. And I think another one of my quotes that I have from your books, positive people attract more joy into their lives. Negative people, on the other hand, attract more misery into their lives. But what I thought was really helpful about the book is like you really gave some concrete examples of how you can turn that negative tendency into, again, like actionable, right? Like how to reverse that tendency, like stop the thoughts, stop the corresponding behaviors and actions that come out of it. And how to really counter every negative thought with its positive opposite. Like that whole section, I really love that. And I also just even beyond just relationships or whatever one's goals might be in romance, there's so much applicability to anyone in any stage of their life, I think, and in any aspect of their life to really take those lessons to heart to really change their negative inner dialogue.
Yeah, that's such an important point. So we all have these stories playing in our minds all of the time. And so if we pause to actually take note of what stories we're telling ourselves, and even better, if you write it down, and then you can intentionally flip it so it becomes sort of the positive opposite. So instead of saying, you know, love is not available to me, instead, if you're saying that over and over, just take a pause, write that down, and what's the opposite? Love is available to me. Love is abundant. And you start telling yourself that story instead, your brain will actually show you different things. It will show you opportunities for love. It'll show you the nice guy who's been flirting with you, but you never noticed because you were so sure love isn't available to you. I don't know if you guys have seen this video that's been going around with Eileen Gu. She was interviewed, she was asked a question about, your thoughts. I mean, like you answer so quickly, like you're obviously like, got so much going on in your head. And she gave this long explanation about how she prepares her mind for Olympic performance, right? And so, this is what an athlete does. They spend just as much training their minds so they're really on. And I feel like we could take that lesson into every area of our lives, just like Noura said, and certainly in love. Like if you don't have the right attitude, if you go to a first date with someone and you're like, okay, here's another date. I know this one's not going to turn out either. This is just going to suck like all the rest of them. That's the experience you're going to have. And that's how you're going to make the other person feel. So, they're probably not going to call you back, even if you like them. But if you go into it like, hey, this is really fun. I get to meet a new person. I wonder what they're like. I'm really curious about them. It's just going to be a really different experience for you and for your date.
Because you're also like seeing it as sort of a growth and connection opportunity when you look at it that way. You're not just, and you're also alleviating some of the pressure that you're putting on yourself and that person to perform at a certain level if you're going into it open minded and with that sort of sense of curiosity versus being strictly outcome oriented. But you did also have a lot of really good points in the book around, once you're kind of on that first date, how you can sort of start to not necessarily categorized, but like the green flags, yellow flags, red flags section, like different sort of indicators that you can take to make sure that you're also investing your time in the way that's going to yield you the ultimate outcome that you want better. And like, trying to tease out some of, the things that might be associated with like seeking a spark, right? And you kind of talk about how that might sort of be a callback to maybe some patterns that you might have had when you were younger for specific types of things that you're looking for based on like your prior experiences. But is that really the right thing that you want for your future? Like, do you really want to invite sort of that uncertainty into the what you want romantically, or alternatively, would you maybe want to find something that brings more peace to you as a result of having this person in your life? And I just thought that that was really interesting because it deviates a lot from what we see in romantic depictions, I think, in media a lot of the time. Like there's a very kind of strong emphasis on sometimes, I think, unhealthy dynamics in relationships. And we see more of those than we necessarily see, the more abiding, comforting kinds of relationships that provide a little bit more strength and stability in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel like we get so many messages growing up about what love should be, and most of them are really bad. Like, Disney movies where, Ariel gives up her whole identity as a mermaid to become a human just for this guy she met once. And then every step she takes on land, it's like a knife stab and she loses her voice. I mean, that's the original version of the story. Disney makes it a little nicer, of course, but it's still the same basic plot line. She gives up everything that she loves and she knew, including her whole, her own identity, in order to be with a guy. And a lot of the movies are like that. Like, it's all about that happy ending once they get together. And before that, there's, even in the rom-coms, there's a big conflict. And, this idea that your eyes meet across the room and you feel that your butterflies going, and that is really an indication of someone being the right person for you, is just kind of laughable. Because how can you, tell from that one glance? Yes, you may be physically attracted to them, and that is important. But the thing about physical attraction is that it can grow as you get to know someone. But if they are like, a complete jerk and they're not there for you and they're putting you through the mill, just, then it doesn't matter how physically attractive he is. They're not the right person for you. So absolutely what you just said, Noura, that instead of looking for chemistry, we really should be looking for compatibility. And that takes time to reveal, but we put so much emphasis on chemistry that we really kind of dismiss a lot of people who might actually make wonderful partners. And so I feel like we look for all the wrong qualities. For example, a lot of my friends say, the guy has to be this tall. And really, how often does height really become an issue when you're with someone? Like pretty much never. But, something like consistency, reliability, kindness, like those are qualities that really matter a lot. And you don't necessarily see all of those things in the beginning. So you kind of do have to give it time. And then what
Those
you
are also the
said,
qualities that like withstand sort of the, ravages of time too, right? Like those are the qualities that
exactly.
hold up over time.
Exactly. Yeah. Because, we're all going to, get old eventually and you want to be with someone, not because they look like a Hollywood A-star, A-list actor, but because, they're there for you and they're supportive and they're all the things you want in a life partner. And then the other thing you said about, the butterflies and the spark. So a lot of times the spark actually is your nervous system telling you there might be something wrong, that this is familiar. You've seen this kind of, person before. And so it can actually be a warning, from our nervous system telling us, hey, pause, like watch out. And instead we interpret that as attraction. So that's another thing to be wary of.
I mean, one of the quotes that I highlighted in my notes too was like, we're taught to chase those feelings, right? The butterflies, but the real magic lives in peace because true passion grows when there's peace. And peace doesn't mean boring. It means freedom, safety, deep joy, and yes, real lasting passion rather than the fleeting variety. And that just, I mean, that resonated with me so much because I think we often get so many signals and messages that run counter to that in many aspects of our lives. But I think that just holds true so strongly. And I mean, I think it can also be like your book talked a lot about kind of like balancing some of the balance of like the online dating world, which can be very overwhelming with the IRL, like meeting people organically or the old fashioned way or what have you. But I thought it was really interesting that you broke all of the kind of methods through which you could meet somebody into a more sort of less overwhelming kind of methodical approach for how you could try different tactics and do it in a way that's not going to cause burnout and still sort of help you have the best opportunity at trying to find the right match for you across these different forms. And I thought that was really interesting. I was hoping you could kind of go into that because I feel like a lot of people could probably relate to, where do I even start? Or I've tried this online dating thing before. I hate this. These platforms, like, I don't know what to make of it. I've been scammed before. Like, a lot of people may have had some bad experiences with some of these different methods, or may find it really hard to meet people organically, and would be interested in it. I would just love if you could kind of talk a bit more about that part of your book as well, because I feel like that has so much relevancy for people that are kind of not sure where to kind of open the floodgates, I guess.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of people are burnt out on dating apps. But the fact is, that's where a lot of single people congregate. And so, it's harder, I would say, to go up to someone, a stranger, and, make conversation with them only to find out they're married. Like, to get rejected in person actually kind of hurts more, and they're not wearing a sign saying I'm available, right? Whereas on an app, they might not be. That is a possibility. But for the most part, they are what they say they are, right? But if you're doing apps, I would say, really like contain it so that it's manageable. It's so much better to just be on the apps for 20 minutes every day or 5 days a week rather than doing 3 hour chunks here and there. That's how you burn out. That's how you feel, just kind of like it just like feels icky. So instead, just do a little bit every day, and don't worry if you're not meeting anyone for a whole month. Like, it doesn't really matter, as long as you're putting in the reps. And then in person, there are a couple of things that are important, I would say. One is, if you can put yourself in a situation where you're meeting somebody more than once. So maybe you're taking a class, like a language class at the community college down the street, or you've joined a pickleball, club or something like that. Because oftentimes people have an easier time getting to know someone and really becoming affectionate with one another when they've known each other over repeated meetings. I think that's one of the things about dating apps that are so hard, because you're being asked to meet a stranger and make up your mind about them right away. And we just don't really work that way. Humans need a lot of interactions before we feel like we can trust someone and we feel like we can really connect with them. The other thing to do is to kind of expand what we already do. So if you're not an athlete, don't join the pickleball club, go to some, I don't know, like board game club or something. Like, there's like some activity where you feel like you get to be you, but you're expanding the environment in which you do it. So it might just be like you like to read a book, but instead of reading at home, take it to a cafe down the street. Or if you already do that, go to a different cafe in a different neighborhood and go there, a few times until you start to recognize some faces. So I think there are ways to kind of strategize. We don't all have like infinite amounts of time. So in the time you have available, like, what are you comfortable doing? What is something that you actually enjoy doing? And then find something you like that actually has men too, because I love doing yoga, but I've never met a straight man in yoga class. So like, be smart about that. And then just kind of put yourself out there. I mean, you're definitely not going to meet anyone if you're just sitting at home every day after work and you're not on the apps, and you're just kind of like, you can manifest all you want, but that's just not going to bring you results. So you do have to take action. But I think there are actions you can take that work better than others.
I mean, I think what was also helpful with the online dating portion of your advice was around like the overwhelming effect that you get. Like, there's just so many people. Like, you kind of get some really good practical advice around how to sort of screen for the person's level of effort is sort of being indicative of what your level of effort should be in return, and also around the like setting filtering criteria to try to at the high level like match like within the app itself, depending on the functionality, to kind of match at least like some of the core things that you're looking for. And I was wondering if you talk a little bit about that as well, just because those are some really good practical pieces of advice, regardless of what platform you're on.
Yeah, so I would say, first of all, write a profile that's pretty fleshed out. So already, it's kind of like marketing, right? Like, when you write marketing copy, you're trying to attract the right customers or clients to you, and you're trying to repel the wrong ones. You don't want to waste time with the people who are just never going to be your person. And so the profile itself should say a lot about you. It should impart some sense of your personality, and it should also give clues about what you're looking for in a guy. So men can just kind of not even participate if they don't fit your criteria. And then when you start exchanging text back and forth, you can ask questions that are very clearly trying to get at a certain type of person. So if you're someone, for example, you love intellectual discussions and you love reading and you love sort of like being having dinner parties with your close friends, then maybe you don't want to be with a guy who's playing sports and watching sports games all the time. So you want to tease out those important sort of compatibility criteria while you're texting. And then I would also say, as soon as possible, get on a video call and have a chat with them. You don't want to waste days and weeks texting with someone and, making up all these thoughts in your head about who they are when you don't really have confirmation of that. And you also, this is a way to weed out scammers as well. So those are big parts of it. I think you should also be really, fun and put some thought into your messages and your questions, because the other thing I talked about quite a bit is that a lot of dating app activity just gets so boring. Like you end up having the same conversation with everyone. What do you do for work? Where are you from? And people just tune out. And they end up like just kind of ghosting you because they're so bored by that conversation. They've had the same conversation with everyone else. And so you want to kind of punch it up and ask questions that are unique and that get them thinking more. So not the generic questions, but questions that get them like to really kind of reflect, and they're much more likely to remember you. And they might decide, okay, you're too weird, you're too intellectual, whatever, but that's fine too, because again, this is not a popularity contest. I feel like a lot of people see it that way. So if they don't get a lot of likes or they don't get a lot of messages, they think, oh, I'm not desirable. I feel bad about myself. But that's not the point of this. The point of this is to match with someone who is compatible with you. And so you might only match with one person a month, but that person might be exactly what you're looking for. So, I wouldn't get discouraged if you don't get a lot of likes.
And I think in terms of like finding the matches that you like, I think you also had some really good practical advice around in the self introspection part of it, sort of after, identifying qualities in yourself. Also, what are your non-negotiables? What are sort of your nice to haves? And like really trying to, like you mentioned, like height is sort of like one of those kind of like arbitrary examples that like that might be locked in stone for somebody, but like does it need to be? Like I just thought it was really helpful the way you kind of walk through like the process of identifying your non-negotiables and your nice to have, and like how you can then reference those when you're reviewing your potential matches or potential dates.
Yeah, yeah. So really, a lot of people talk about checklists now, and I think a lot of people have checklists that are not that helpful. And the best way of thinking about it for me is to consider that you're hiring, basically not hiring, but you're trying to recruit your MVP teammate, right? And to have an MVP teammate, you don't need someone who's tall. You don't need someone who has to have gone to an Ivy League school. You don't need certain things that you might have thought was necessary. Instead, there are certain characteristics that I would say is true for everyone. We want somebody who is going to be a good listener, who's present for us, who's interested in us. That's like a big one, right? Because a lot of women will chase men who are not that interested just because they check off all the other boxes. But if they're not interested in us, we don't waste our time with them. And things like thoughtfulness, similar future goals. Like if you're, wanting to have kids, you don't want to waste time dating men who are not interested in that. So these are all things that you should be really clear about what you want. And then you should find out this stuff pretty early on. So it's not that on the first date you're asking, I'm like, how many kids do you think you'll want to have with me? But, you should at least get a sense that somebody is family oriented. And it should come up earlier rather than later. So don't, I feel like a lot of us date kind of in our fantasy lives. Like we think, oh, there's so much good about this that, it will eventually turn into what I want it to be. And instead of wasting years with someone who's never going to be what you want them to be, instead spend the time actually interviewing or dating lots of different people to see the right one, the one who fits from the start.
And I think part of the piece on aligning expectations that you said that like made a lot of sense to me was like also the benefit of the online dating versus the in-person is like you can say I am looking for this kind of relationship up front and reinforce that. Like if you do progress to meeting this person on video or in person, you can reinforce it and then have the conversation if it does progress to sort of reinforce like this is what I'm looking for and make sure that there's alignment there. So that's kind of one of the nicer things about online dating is you can state that up front and they will know that before talking to you that that's something that you're looking
Exactly.
for.
Yeah, yeah, and I feel like a lot of us are scared to say that to a guy, but the thing is, there are men who want that just as much as women do. And so if you are upfront about that and they know there is some tacit, agreement that that's what they're looking for too, but they also often say it on their profile, right? So that is kind of the nice thing. You don't have to kind of try to guess. But if you do meet someone off the app and you're not sure, I would say second or third date. You don't have to say I want to marry you and have like spend the rest of my life with you, but you can say something like, so just so you know, I'm looking for something serious. I want to commit a relationship, and it doesn't have to be with you. I don't know you well enough yet, but I'm just wondering if that's what you're looking for too. Because if not, then we probably shouldn't waste too much of each other's time. And so I think in general we should just be a lot more honest with each other about everything. Like, I've gotten the question a few times about who should pay for the first date. Even there, it's tricky because we've all grown up with different messages, right? Like, there's no like one way to behave anymore in the dating space. And so I would just say, hey, so what are your thoughts about paying for the first date? Like, do you feel like the man should do it, or should we go Dutch, or like, what are your thoughts? And it actually tells you so much about their values and about what they think about money. And so you get a lot of valuable information instead of just kind of swallowing it and, being pissed because he didn't pay or whatever reaction you might have. Just put it out in the open and talk about it.
But you did say in your book, right? Like your partner's not a mind reader, right? Like it's really incumbent upon you to communicate things that you feel or just whatever you're feeling, especially things that you're feeling strongly about. Like they're not going to just know that intrinsically. It's really on you to make sure you share your thoughts with your partner.
Yeah, and unfortunately, growing up, I feel like, women were often told, like, you know, be easy, like don't complain, just suck it up and, just show up and smile and and so we have to kind of undo a lot of the conditioning we got growing up.
I mean, practical advice that you gave to kind of really help with some of the unconditioning, like when you actually do show up and meet somebody in person, whether it's like, you've met them online, you've met them through some other in-person method, is like you talked about the five C words is sort of like a good mantra to kind of keep in your mind to help you, show up in the way that you want to show up, right? It was comfortable, confident, calm, curious, and connected, right? And that's something I think like endures from the first date through any future dates that you have with that person. I think you're quite right. Women are often given very different kinds of messages, I think, as far as how they should show up. But I think your point ultimately boiled down to like, you show up as yourself, like show up as much as possible as your authentic self, because that, there is somebody that will be the right match for your authentic self. You don't need to be anybody else.
Absolutely, right? Like I feel like so many of us go into dates thinking that we're going to an audition, like we have to like impress this person. And so then we're all kind of wound up and uncomfortable. Instead, if we go into it believing that we are an amazing catch and that we're the ones auditioning them, like we're there to really kind of discern, is this person the right person for me? It makes the whole experience more enjoyable, and it makes us actually choose a better partner because they're seeing us for who we are. So if they do want to continue seeing us, they're choosing us for who we are, not for some like, fake performance that we put on. So yeah, I mean, those five C's, I mean, they work really well because even something like comfortable, like so many of us, maybe we put on an outfit that makes us, shows our cleavage, but we're like self-conscious and adjusting our straps the whole night. I mean, that's not a good way to enjoy a date. And the guy might not even like, a woman's showing that much skin. So instead, just be you, wear the thing that makes you feel comfortable, but also feel like, yeah, I feel hot. And just be like the best version of yourself and trust that there is somebody out there who is going to appreciate exactly what you bring to the table.
I like to pause for a second here, Mina, just to, invite our audience. Something Mina has shared really resonates with you or challenges you. If you feel comfortable, please feel free to come off of mute and, raise your hand. We'd love to bring your voices in the conversation. If you have questions or anything you'd like to bring in the conversation, really, this is open to everyone. No pressure. You can also drop it into the chat if you're feeling a little shy.
I can kind of jumpstart things a little bit. I just wanted to add that when you're talking about in real life spaces too, don't forget your brown clubs because I personally know, even if you're not necessarily finding your love connection at a brown club event where you live, like you will be connecting with people, and that's always a great thing to have in your toolkit and just in life. And also reunion. I personally know two people, two good friends of mine that met their spouse at a reunion. So this is kind of like, those are just, some baked in opportunities. But one of the questions that I had just kind of comes because like Min and I are kind of the same Brown era. I'm class of 1990. I'm just wondering if you noticed in your research and then working on this book, any kind of differences in strategy or importance issues between kind of younger folk and older folk? Because obviously grew up in like the men are from Mars, women are from Venus era, and like all of these self-help books about how to behave. And so, like you're younger, you're really grinding, you're really trying to be that boss lady. And then when you're older, you're kind of like, well, I already know I'm like the boss lady, and my priorities may be different. I don't need to have this person where they are on the same page for kids and stuff like that. So I just wondered if you notice anything or anything you might add for maybe older alums that are in this space kind of looking for someone.
Yeah, for sure. And a lot of women my age, if they're looking, often they're, maybe divorced, maybe widowed. Um, Although I've also met many women in their 50s who've never been in a serious relationship. So, and not because they're not attractive or anything, but again, a lot of them have, childhood wounds that perhaps they haven't healed entirely. And so they've been repeating the same sort of pattern over and over. So I would say one thing that's different when you're older is that you're really not looking for potential anymore. Like you're not dating a guy thinking, well, he'll eventually like grow into himself, right? And by this time we kind of have a life that's pretty awesome already. Like we often have homes, maybe we already have children. And so we're not looking for someone to, complete us or to save us or anything like that. We really want someone who's going to enhance our lives. And we're looking for someone who's already finished. So, someone who already kind of clicks with us, that there is no kind of growing up together. I mean, when you meet somebody in college, there is a lot of growing up left to do. So that kind of relationship looks really different. And then, what you mentioned, I mean, I feel like we got a lot of really bad advice about love, like the men are from Mars and, all the Sex in the City, silliness. And there were just so many books that were just kind of off. And I feel like we really kind of took a lot of that as truth. And so I think there's a lot of unlearning to do.
I would open this to anyone else on this call as well, but Mina, I'd particularly be interested to know, like, what's one belief about love that you personally had to unlearn?
Oh, there were so many. I think one of the biggest ones was that love is about sacrifice. Because my parents, you know, my mother was a lovely woman and she was so giving to us. My father was probably mentally ill. And so a lot of her marriage was about sacrificing herself and being a martyr. And so that was sort of the model I grew up with. And I didn't see a lot of tenderness between them. I didn't see, affection. So I just didn't know how to recognize those qualities of love. So it's been surprising to me with my current partner who is so sweet and so giving and so supportive. Like I always think, really? Like, are you for real? But it exists. That's the thing. It exists. And I'm pretty sure if I had met him 20 years ago, I would not have given him a second look. So yeah, that's a big one. And if you keep looking for that, that love is all about sacrifice, you're going to keep putting yourself in situations where you're being asked to sacrifice and asked to suffer. And you don't really believe that love can be peaceful and, add to your life.
That it can help you fill your cup rather than drain it.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, I guess my one question, I know we didn't really cover this topic yet. I'd be very curious to know. I mean, I know hypnotherapy is one of your areas of expertise, and particularly is kind of talking about some of the past trauma with the small t or large t that some of us may carry into other aspects of our lives, and particularly romantic lives. Like, what are some ways, like, or how can hypnotherapy help people to identify and heal wounds that are getting in their way when they're trying to find love?
Yeah, so hypnotherapy has been really great for my clients. They end up one of the big things it does is to bring to the surface a lot of these beliefs that we hold in our subconscious. Because sometimes we don't even know we're carrying these beliefs. Like the one that I just talked about. I wasn't really conscious of that, but they're actually dictating so many of my actions and decisions. And so that's one, becoming conscious. And then the second is you get to rewrite the stories. This is what I mentioned before. You get to actually rewrite the stories that you've been carrying out around, and you get to rewrite them in a way that's much more empowering. And then the third is that when you're in a state of hypnosis, you're very suggestible. Your mind is like a sponge. And so in that state, we come up with new beliefs that are much more empowering. So again, a lot of our beliefs are very limiting because of whatever hurts we encountered when we were younger. By really being intentional about implanting new beliefs, we end up really kind of expanding the possibilities for ourselves. And so it's really powerful. It's nothing like what you see in movies. I feel like a lot of people have the wrong idea of what hypnosis is. And scientists are starting to work on this area, and they've found there's a lot that happens when our brains are in a certain relaxed state, that we're able to take in things that we might not otherwise. And you're aware the entire time. And so you do have agency, but you're also much more open to thinking about things in a different way.
I think the other thing that really captured my imagination, about what you wrote in your book was, related to kind of the scientific evidence behind manifestation. We hear a lot about manifestation, in media and social media, and being kind of thrown around casually a lot of the time. But I was just really interested to read the actual science behind manifesting sort of the outcome that you want for yourself. And I would just love to hear more about that, because I feel like that has so much relevancy, I think, to everyone here. Is like, how can you sort of apply that to your situation?
Yeah, so, we take in so much sensory data at every moment. Our brain can't begin to process all of it. We would just shut down from and just be overwhelmed. So, what our brain does is it filters just the slew of things coming at us into just an amount that we can handle. And there's a part of our brain that does this kind of filtering. It's like a gatekeeper for the brain. And it does so based on what you already believe. So if you think that, the example that people always give is cars. So if you're about to buy, a white Kia, all of a sudden you see white Kias everywhere because you've cued your brain that this is something that's significant to you. It's going to help you survive, basically. And so then it all of a sudden is able to see what it wasn't able to see before. And so with manifestation, you're basically trying to envision the kind of love that you want, the kind of life, job, whatever it is. And the more you make that a familiar image in your brain, it's almost as though it's already happened. Your brain starts to find opportunities to make this reality. And if you don't, the flip side is if it feels too unfamiliar, like if you feel like, okay, I've always failed in love, love is not possible, so you can't envision what that looks like, then you're going to have the sort of the opposite thing. You're going to keep making choices that take you in the opposite direction because your brain feels like it's dangerous to do something that's unfamiliar. The familiar becomes safe. That's just how our brain works. And anything that's not familiar is unsafe. So even that nice guy who would make a wonderful partner, on some level, he feels unsafe to you if you did not come from a home where that kind of safety was, the norm. So you have to retrain your brain, and you can do that. That's the wonderful thing. We can actually be very intentional about planting certain thoughts in our heads. Or if we have a thought come up in our brains, like, love is not available, you can catch yourself and immediately say the opposite and make yourself say the opposite over and over, because we form new neural pathways. That's basically like how we learn new things, through repetition. So if you're really deliberate about repeating things that help you, that can actually turn things around for you quite a bit.
I mean, I think that was one thing I just practically speaking, I really loved about your book. You had so many practical pieces of advice on how to reframe things, whether it's your internal dialogue or in conflict, right? Like conflict, one thing we didn't talk about was like conflict's not a bad thing, right? It's more how you approach and resolve conflict. And I think one of the most amazing pieces of practical advice you gave was around, using I statements to express your feelings rather than blame. And it immediately, takes the conversation in a different direction, right? Like I think you gave an example of specifically of like an argument that, or a kind of negative thought or something you're upset about with your in your relationship, and how you reframed it in your own mind before you said what it was. I think it was related to like, when you had COVID. And that kind of completely changed the dynamic compared to what maybe your initial thought might have been. And I thought that was just extremely powerful, and just from a general communication, whether it's relationships or otherwise, such a good way to reframe how you're thinking about the thing that's upsetting you and how you want to communicate that to somebody else.
Yeah, so often when we're hurt or upset, we are flooded with emotions. And so we often want to go on the attack, because if we're feeling bad, we want the other person to feel bad too. But that never gets you the results that you want. So instead, if you're able to articulate to someone, like, I feel this way because, so in the example of the COVID example, it was that my partner didn't really come visit me or look, check up on me when I was sick. He figured like he couldn't hang out. So he was just doing his own thing. And I said, I felt really lonely here by myself. Like I felt like nobody cared, and it was pretty sad the last few days. And so immediately, like half an hour later, he showed up with food and flowers. Whereas the old me would have just like had a little tantrum, and I would have said, you don't care and you're an asshole. And like, I would have just like made a scene, and then he would have gotten defensive, and he would have felt like, wow, like this is not fun. And instead he got to feel like he was the good guy, because he did all these things to make me feel better, but I had to tell him what would have made me feel better. And that's often what we don't do. Like, we need to let people know what we want, what our needs are, and we're afraid to do that because we think it might make us too high maintenance or too needy. And we have to just get over that. Like, relationships are about meeting both partners' needs, and they can't be met unless we actually say them out loud, because everybody has different expectations and different desires.
I think sometimes people are just afraid to be vulnerable. I think that's part of like your reframing exercise, I think does invite a lot of vulnerability, throughout the book, right? Like introspection, things that might be uncomfortable to think about or confront or navigate, or, just even navigating your feelings internally, right? Like that requires a lot of vulnerability and bravery, really, to go through that exercise.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And the funny thing is, it's hard to do that because it takes vulnerability, but that's how we actually create the connections that we want, as opposed to the old way, like letting our egos get the best of us and having a tantrum or deciding not to date at all. And then, you get more of the same, which is you feeling lonely and sad and disconnected. So it does take bravery, and, we have to believe that it's worth it.
I think that's a really great place to stop, unless some of our attendees have any final questions they've been sitting on.
There's no wrong questions, and you
Yeah,
can ask broadly. It doesn't have to be personal. And if you're wondering it, somebody else probably is too. So feel
exactly.
free. You can be vulnerable in this space.
Um,
Welcome.
Yeah. Well, obviously, I know, Minna, you've shared your contact information, which you could drop in the chat again for people if they have follow-up questions, maybe not at the moment, but somewhere down the road. Thanks so much. And you're down in Southern California, right? So
Mhm.
if people are in Southern California, maybe they want to do a drive-by as well. But I just really want to thank both you and Nora for participating with this and sharing your work with us. And it really is a genre that I feel in the Brown canon doesn't get shared as much as all the other books that are out there from Brown authors. So I really appreciate you sharing this with us and sharing yourself and yourselves, both of you. And yeah, and just as a final promo, we do have our next edition of One Bear, One Book will be in March 26th from the Brown Club of Boston. And the book is Noah's Rejects by apparently Minna's classmate, Rob Kagan, class of 89. So we're doing kind of an 89 special this year. Um, but thanks again, and we'll see you next time.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much, everyone.